Women have always faced difficulties in the working world. From gaining equal rights to earning equal pay, it's been an uphill battle. Some women have had to fight tooth and nail to be in positions of rank and power. So how did women get to where they are today? What have they overcome, and what do they still face? Are women equal in the workforce?
No. Although we might legally supposed to have equal rights, it's still not that way today. There are still many different categories of work where women are very underrepresented.
I believe that in the United States, our laws are laid down that women do have equal rights in the United States, but sometimes in practice, these laws aren't as enforced as they should be.
Let's backtrack a bit and take a look at what women have accomplished already. 140 years ago, only 15% of the workforce had a second X chromosome. In the late 1800s, it was very much a man's world.
The lack of female counterparts was due mostly to the fact that only young and unmarried women were employed at the turn of the century. They were limited to a few fields like textiles and teaching, and were expected to leave work as soon as they were married.
The courts didn't exactly help the cause early on. In 1908, Kurt Muller was fined $10 for making a female employee work more than 10 hours a day in his laundry business. Muller challenged the state of Oregon for penalizing him as a business owner. Justice Brandeis sided with Oregon.
This case reduced the number of hours that women could work, citing reasons such as physical weakness and their role as childbearers. It basically justified gender discrimination and usage of labor laws.
I think that they are increasingly represented, but there's still segments or sectors, industry sectors, where they're underrepresented.
And then there was World War II. When every available man was needed to fight, somebody still needed to make the machinery at home. Who better than the wives they left behind? Women saw action in fields that they couldn't enter before. Industries that had previously barred them suddenly needed their help in the factories more than they needed them at home.
When the war ended, the majority of working women returned home, but the idea of fiscal independence began to grow. Many women realized that there was more they could do than just run a household. The 1940s and 50s saw more women attending college, even though a hefty majority were there to get a Mrs. degree, also known as husband hunting.
We've been looking at women in the workforce for the last 40 years, okay? And during that time, a lot of changes have taken place. In the 60s and 70s, what had been a long-running change, essentially an evolution, towards more and more female participation in the labor market really switched over as more and more young women began to realize that they were likely to be spending a major portion of their adult lives in the labor market and then make educational and job training investments accordingly.
The field I work in, animal science, like our major, for instance, has more women than men by a long shot. And veterinary school classes are close to 80% women these days. So that's definitely what I would consider a career in agriculture. You know, there's probably certain fields that are more male dominated. So for instance, my son's a turfgrass major. There's very few women in that field. You look at even wildlife and fisheries, forestry, I think it's very field dependent. And I don't really know what the reason is. I don't think it's that women cannot do those jobs. But I think there is a difference in the industries. And so I think it's going to take a little longer maybe for women to be more accepted into those.
I think it's getting better. It used to be a lot worse, but now it's definitely changed. I know, I recently heard that for medical school, it's 50-50 women and men, so I think it's better.
I will say, though, that probably in certain companies they do hire women so that they can boost their numbers.
I think that they're hired because they're as qualified, and they may help increase the representation of their group.
In 1963, Congress finally tried to help the cause. The Equal Pay Act gave women the power to sue their employers if they received lower pay than their male counterpart, but put in the same amount of work. Unfortunately, the law didn't help very much, because all an employer needed to do was cite a plausible reason for the pay difference and the case would be dismissed.
Organizations like the National Association of Working Women and Business and Professional Women's Foundation have carried the banner for equality in the workforce. A recent success for the campaign was the Lilly Ledbetter Act of 2009.
The Lilly Ledbetter Act was the first law in 46 years that was written to patch some of the holes in the Equal Pay Act. Lilly Ledbetter was a retiring employee of Goodyear Tires when she discovered that she had been paid significantly less than her male counterparts for several years. To make a long story short, she sued! The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Goodyear because the statute of limitations under the Equal Pay Act was too short. The lawmakers sought to remedy this injustice for others like Lilly in 2009.
There's gender segregation in the labor market that's been going on for a long time. But the degree of gender segregation has been declining slowly for several decades, reflecting the changes that we're talking about.
As far as things more science and technology based, women are still very underrepresented. While they have made some strides, if you look at some of the numbers, they're still very male-centered.
The Paycheck Fairness Act of 2010 was another piece of legislation meant to improve the effectiveness of the Equal Pay Act. It failed to pass in Congress when it couldn't garner 60 votes to clear the filibuster. So, where does that leave us today? Women have come so far, but they haven't bridged the gap completely. The wage gap currently stands at women earning 77 cents to a man's $1. While it may never be totally equal, will it ever be equal enough?
Because of the gender segregation that I talked about, or the occupational segregation by gender. All right? The Equal Pay Act basically said equal pay for equal work. But a big issue 40 years ago, and still somewhat of an issue, is women don't do the same kind of work that men do, all right, in the aggregate. And so this gets back to what I was saying about occupational segregation, that it's been declining, but it's still there.
I think we're still at a point where people feel like they need to hire a certain amount of women because employers will face certain stigmas that they don't have a lot of women employed. So sometimes they will just, employ more rather than having the best employees.
What it all comes down to is that the workforce isn't 100% equal between men and women, and it's very possible that it never will be. It was once believed that if enough women waited patiently for women to graduate from college and gain the skills necessary to enter the workforce, equality would follow. Like a pipeline being filled, eventually the pressure would cause progress. Women have come a long way, but education and experience can only bridge the gap so much.
I think that really the door is wide open. I think if you're willing to work hard, anything is attainable, and I don't think gender really should have anything to do with it.